Hello there. I'd like to speak a little bit about chord symbols and what we do when we see chord symbols that we're not sure about whether we can play them or what they even mean. So most simple songs will have major chords, possibly minor chords, and a combination of both. So an example of a major chord as a chord symbol would just be a G, or a D, meaning G major, D major, F major. That's a straight major chord. In other words, it's notes 1, 3 and 5 from the major scale. And that's it. If it's a minor chord, it's the same thing, 1, 3 and 5, but the third is a minor third, or the third is called a flat third, flat 3. That's it, simple. If all songs are like that, it would be very easy, chord-wise. But thank God they're not. So we've got a little bit more variation than that. On the chord symbol chart, which you'll see on the screen, there are various different chords, all more complicated than a straight major or minor. So, what chord symbols can we play if we don't understand what the additional signs mean? Let's have a look at the first one. G flat, well, that's just a note, isn't it? So a G flat chord is a major chord built on a G flat. Fine. The letter doesn't really matter. The flat or the sharp doesn't really matter as long as we can find that note on the guitar. So G flat major 7. Well, what does that mean? We've added the 7th note from the major scale into that chord, that's all. That's what it means. Everything after the letter is either an addition or a modification. That's all. If the number is 7 or above, then it's an addition because our straight major or minor chord only has notes 1, 3 and 5 in it. So a G flat major 7 simply means a straight G flat major chord 1, 3 and 5. Those are the note numbers in the chord, or the chord tones, 1, 3 and 5, or the first, the third and the fifth. Plus we add note 7. Now, if you can't play a major 7 chord, just ignore it. The rule is when we add a number, you can just ignore the addition. If you can't play a major 7 chord, or you can't play it quick enough, if you're sight reading the music, just ignore it. You can't make anything sound bad by not adding a note. So if I saw a G flat or anything, D flat, C, F, major 7 chord, and I didn't immediately know the shape, I could just play a straight major chord. A flat major chord. B flat major chord. Whatever the chord symbol was. C major chord. If I can't play a C major 7, which is that, I can play a C major chord. Now, it might not sound, obviously, exactly the same as what the music intended or the writer intended, but you're not going to do any harm by not playing the 7 that's added on after the main chord symbol letter, A, B, C, D, F, G, etc. Next chord is G major 9. Now the little triangle also means major 7. I much prefer that. I never write major 7 if I can help it. I would always write the triangle. So the triangle means major 7. So that symbol means G major 7, but also with the 9 added. So in short, it's called a G major 9. Again, we add the 7 and the 9. We can ignore them. If you can't play a major 9 chord, just ignore it and play a straight G chord. Straight G chord, G major 9 chord. The major 9 is much more, much different sounding. I nearly said better then. It's different sounding. It's much more complex. If you like that sound, brilliant. If you can play it, great. If you can't, don't worry too much about it. You can always play a straight G or straight whatever the chord is. D7, because the number we add is the 7. In this case, it's called a dominant 7, which means we're adding the flat 7 into the D major scale, D major chord, we can ignore that because, again, it's just an additional number. Regardless of whether it's a 7 or a flat 7, we can just ignore it. So if you can't play a D7, which is that, we can just play a D chord. We can ignore the number. Likewise, F sharp 7 or any other letter with a 7 afterwards, we don't have to play the full 7 chord, we can just play an F sharp major chord or whatever, G sharp, D, whatever. D13, same thing. We've got a number added to the chord. Now there are a few exceptions to the 13th chord, but in the vast majority of cases you can just ignore the 13 and you can play a D chord. Or you could ignore the 13 and play a D7, because the 13 implies that we're adding the 7 as well, and the 9. But the simplest way of simplifying it is that we can just ignore the 13 and play a D. So it's a D chord, D13, D chord, 13 chord, do there as well. And it sounds very different, but, well, it's not going to do any harm to the song or the music by playing a D major chord, which is notes 1, 3 and 5 from the D major scale, and not playing the full 1, 3, 5, flat 7 and 9. So all the chords that are written in black on the sheet on the screen can be simplified all the way back to the letter. An A minor 7, a minor 7 chord can be written small m with a 7, or it can be written with a dash and a 7. I prefer dash and 7. So if I write a minor 7 chord, I'll write dash and 7. So A minor 7 can be simplified to A minor. We can't ignore the minor bit, but we can ignore the number. So if I can't play an A minor 7, I can just play an A minor chord or any other letter. G minor chord, F minor chord, etc. C minor 11, exactly the same thing. I can just ignore the 11 and I can play a C minor. I could play some of the numbers beneath 11, like the 9 and the 7, because they normally exist there if you've got enough fingers. So I could play a C minor 7 instead of a C minor 11, but the fullest way of simplifying it, the most simple way, is to play a C minor. F7 flat 9 is exactly the same, because the numbers are added. We can ignore them, regardless of whether they're sharpened or flattened. So we can ignore the 7 and we can ignore the flat 9. Likewise, if it was an F9 chord, we can just ignore the 9, regardless of whether it's flat or sharp. Like the F7 sharp 9, we can ignore that and just play an F. Or we could sort of half ignore it and just play the F7. That's not a problem. Now, what I have written in blue are cases that have to be treated carefully. So, D7 sus. We can simplify that, but we can't simplify it all the way back to just the letter D, or the chord D, because the sus affects the straight 1, 3, 5 of the D major chord. So we can get rid of the 7, we can ignore the 7, but we can't ignore the sus. So we can simplify a D7 sus to a D sus chord. A D7 sus, there you go. There were more notes in that than in the straight 1, 3, 5 of the D chord. We add the flat 7, and the third is, in the vast majority of cases, it's got rid of and we play the fourth instead. So I'm not playing the third in that chord. That's the important bit, the fourth added. That's what sus means. The flat 7, the 7 in the D7, I can ignore that and just play a straight D7. Sorry, my mistake, a straight D sus. That's a D sus. Notes 1, 4 and 5 from the D major scale, that's it. To be honest, a D7 sus is an easier fingering, but there you go. You can always just play a D sus. Very common sounding chord. Commonly occurring chord, should I say. There's the D7 sus. Even nicer, I think. Next one, again, because it's got sus, it's got more than just a number, we have to be careful with that one. So an F flat 9, yeah. Normally we can ignore the flat 9, but because there's a sus afterwards, we can't ignore the sus. So we can play that as an F sus. We can ignore the flat 9, but we can't ignore the sus. So we can play just a straight F. Sorry, yes, F. That's an F sus. It would be a problem if I just played an F chord, because that is a different type of harmony to an F sus chord. The flat 9, we can ignore that. Incidentally, it doesn't matter where you put the flat 9 in a chord, it has a different sound. If I put it low, which is where it normally goes, much nicer, well, I think, nicer sound than if I put it high, which sounds pretty hideous, because we have what's called a flat 9 interval there, which is an acquired taste, shall we say. So the blue ones we have to treat carefully. Now, the red ones we have to treat even more carefully, because we can't simplify those in the same way. The reason is because the number that is added is a 5. Now, we don't normally have to add a 5 because there's already a 5 in a major or minor chord. But this is a flat 5 or a sharp 5. So A minor 7 flat 5, that is a direct modification of the original A minor chord. An A minor chord is notes 1 minor third and 5th in the chord, a straight minor triad, 1 flat 3 5 or 1 minor 3 5. But the flat 5 means we're actually modifying one of our original notes. Remember, the original notes in a chord are 1 3 and 5. The flat 5 means we're not adding a note, we're modifying one of the notes that's there. So we can't ignore that. We can't just play a straight A minor, because that's got a normal 5, what's called a natural 5. So we can't modify that. So that's where the buck stops. One can always just learn the shape. A minor 7 flat 5. There's the flat 5 on the top. Flat 7, flat 3, flat 5. But when I say flat 7, I mean minor 7. Root, minor 7. Minor third, flat 5. Whereas a normal minor chord, totally different type of harmony. Likewise, D7 flat 5, I can't ignore the flat 5 because it's a modification of the underlying chord, the underlying triad, the underlying 1, 3 and 5 that makes up our basic chord, whether it's a minor or a major chord. I can ignore the 7. Incidentally, we can ignore the 7 in the A minor 7 chord, but we can't ignore the 5. We can ignore the 7 in a D7 flat 5 chord, but we can't ignore the 5. So I could just play a D root and the flat 5. That would be fine. I could just play 1 flat 5 8. Like a purple haze. Next one, D7 sharp 5. Again, because we're modifying the 5, and the 5 is one of our fundamental notes in the the major or minor chord, we can't just ignore it. We can't play a normal major chord because the normal major chord has got a natural 5 in. This 5 is modified. We can ignore the 7, but we can't ignore the 5, so best just to learn the shape. D7. D7 sharp 5 or any 7 sharp 5. It's that sound. We can just play the 1 and the sharp 5. Or there. We can ignore the 7. We can play 1, 3, sharp 5. We can ignore the 7. But we can't ignore the flat 5, the sharp 5. Next one is a special case. Even more special than the blue ones. A11. An 11 chord is pretty much basically a sus chord. So the same thing applies to sus chords. If we really want to play an A11 or an A sus, in other words, we don't want to just go silent or get our chord book out, you can simplify it, but you simplify it to another chord. So you can simplify, for instance, an A11, which sounds like this, to a major chord 1 tone down. And what I'm actually playing with my fingers there, that looks like a G major chord. It is a G major chord, if I don't put the A in the bass. But if I put it over an A, that's called an A11 chord. Sometimes it's called G over A, or a slash chord G over A. G chord over an A chord in the bass. Or just A11. So when you see an 11 chord, you can always play a major chord 1 tone down. If I saw, say, C11, and I can't play that, I can just play a B flat chord. 1 tone down, C to B flat. Just a straight major chord. And it's a nice little effect to do if you're changing chords very quickly. Then you see something like a D11 chord, just play a C major chord. Or you see an A11 chord, just play a G major chord. It's particularly nice if you're already playing a G major chord and the next chord is an A11 because you can just stay on the chord. G major, A, 11, or B, sorry, A major, B11. I leave the A major there and just add a B. So that's the exception. So, to cut a long story short, any number in a chord symbol, any number that's after the letter, the main letter of the chord, any number, even if it's preceded by a sharp or a flat, can be ignored, except if it's a 5. And I'm not suggesting you do ignore it, because it's nice to play the real shape, the proper shape, get an idea what the writer had it intended when the symbols, when the chords were written. But if you want to, if you can't play the full shape, just ignore it. Very useful for beginners when you're looking at chord books and there's all these 7s and 9s and 13s all over the place. Now the exception is 11 chords. With 11 chords, in other words D11, F11, any chord letter symbol with a number after that happens to be 11, these are special cases. They are simplified to a major chord, simple major chord, but 1 tone down. Whoops, just dropped my plectrum. 1 tone down. Okay, I hope that all makes sense. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.